Hi, this is Privateer Station, and this week we are bringing you day 803 of Putin's invasion into Ukraine. As always, this week will be reviewed by former advisor to the Office of the President, Lieutenant Colonel Alexey Arestovich, currently in exile, political exile from Ukraine, and Nikolai Feldman, a rather prominent Ukrainian blogger and journalist. Today they deep dive into the matters of current front situation and whether the country leadership should be held accountable for their mistakes during the war. As always, thank you, dear members, for your continuous support. We do appreciate that. You make our life a little easier, keeping this work going. And today, thanks go to Darren Matthews and Andrei Patinko. Thank you so much, guys. With this, day 803. Enjoy. Hello, everybody. This is Project Alpha. You're watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey, hello. Thanks for joining. Good evening. Good evening, Nikolai. I do want to ask you at the very beginning of the stream about your commentary in regards to recent news that, as it seems to me, the Russia is starting their nuclear blackmail that you've promised us for quite a while that likely will happen. What do you think about all their statements that F-16, regardless of its modification, will be considered by Russia as a carrier of nuclear arms? Bring us the exact quote, Kolya. Sure, here we go. We will treat F-16 jets that appear in Ukraine as carriers of nuclear arms, regardless of their modification. Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs. What did they tell us? They told us how they're going to react to this, right? Right. We can tell them back that we'll consider you to be idiots, which you are, have been for quite a long time. So they can accept, they can consider, they can treat them, and they can treat them as, I don't know, horsemen of the apocalypse, which might be somewhat true for them. And what? I don't know. These training exercises they started, well, they can accept, they cannot accept, whatever they do. All these trainings that they announced and all these attempts to make international claim that Zelensky is wanted in Russia and Poroshenko, Pavlyuk and the rest, one should not forget that they're going through that inauguration of a freshly elected so-called new president. And they do have to make some statements in this regard as well, as scarier as they can. By the way, Xi Jinping is visiting Macron today in France, so they have to make another statement just in case to continue looking scary. And they have to keep making these statements. It's been about a week since the West said, hey, France actually does have nuclear arms to counter Russian threat. And it took them a week to consider that and to eventually call upon the French ambassador in Russia and talk to him. But once again, while nobody is listening to us, we're not afraid of you. And nobody is afraid of you. With all your nukes, all your posturing, and scary statements. So you think we should just treat it as the background for Xi Jinping's visit to France and for Putin's inauguration yet again? Right, this is a system of bluff they're pushing that shows that they indeed are concerned with F-16s. They're afraid of them appearing on the front. They're afraid of French initiatives and possible outcome of Macron and Xi Jinping negotiations. Because their main fear is that Xi Jinping might abandon them while negotiating with Europe. Because one thing is to peddle that fantastic story of Russian-Chinese relations, but China is definitely understanding that their volume of trade with Europe is much higher than their volume of trade with Russia. Has always been. Also, this week, Alexei, there was a publication that in Central Asia, there are serious military training exercises, and China, NATO, and the rest are observing them. So it might appear that this path from China through Central Asia can actually live just fine without Russia and Iran's involvement, and that could be a good trade route for EU. All right, but here one needs to understand that China needs to come to a conclusion. What is more important, relations with EU and United States or relations with Russia and Iran? Chinese calculate things pretty well. Of course, it's fine to have allies to be allies with Iran and Russia, to use them to scare the West a little bit, to exert some pressure, and to be part of that multipolar world. But the moment the Chinese start to really calculate their profits, they understand that 75% of their wealth, of their economic income, is dependent upon good trade with EU and United States. If that is disrupted, all the problems in the Chinese society, and they have a ton of them, will be exacerbated and will start popping up. Do they need that? At least on this stage, when one cannot consider them being ready to any serious conflict? That's a big question. I think no. So if they will be really pushed to the wall and will have to choose between the trade with EU and United States, and they are helping Russia. Blinken was talking about that when he visited them. I think in this case their selection will be not in favor of Mother Russia. They will not abandon Russia completely, but they will likely move the balance to a very uncomfortable position for Moscow. And Moscow will only have to puff their eyebrows and say, well, we'll show you if you really upset us. But at the same time, NATO would be saying that these are the red lines for China. And America and Europe are saying that we will bring our troops into Ukraine, we will not abandon it if the situation is really dire. Russia recently made a statement that if British arms will be used to hit the territory of Russia, we will absolutely consider all the objects in London, all of the British objects outside of Ukraine as legal, legit targets. And I do have questions here. Which ones? The yachts of Russian oligarchs at London wharfs, or the real estate in London, where probably half of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has their property? Which goal that Russia may target outside of Ukraine? Australia, New Zealand, Canada? That's what they're threatening now. Well, they have a perfect opportunity to threaten the United States now, right? Because one of the leaders in the US said that, the Democratic leader said that they will bring American troops to the front if situation requires that. So I'm yet to see Russian reaction to that. I think this is all posturing for the internal audience in Russia. They understand that nobody cares about them outside. I think the notes about that will be sounded in tomorrow's inaugural speech. It could be preparation for Putin's inauguration, or again, they'll probably talk about we are getting tighter, stronger, we're all together fighting this big war against the world. The selection of certain pokes and prods that are supposed to enact certain reaction from Russian audience that will be glued to the screens are the ones that still believe their propaganda. Sorry, Alexey, I forgot what I wanted to say. United States would have to bring troops to Ukraine. That's the exact formulation of the representatives in the House of Representatives in the United States. Will have to. That's the formulation that came from one of the congressmen. That framework will have to. What does it prepare the United States for? To move responsibility for collapse of the front? Well, first of all, we are pretty far away from the front collapse. We only have serious issues on one small segment of the front, Ocheretina direction. On the other hand, those issues are not of such a scale that one can talk about the front collapse. And also, Russia doesn't really have reserves to collapse the front and run somewhere forth. Even though the situation is difficult, it's troublesome, but it doesn't mean catastrophe or collapse. And I think the leader of Democrats is making that statement not just because, but he's making that statement near Russian inauguration, near Xi Jinping visit to France, basically outlining the readiness for certain actions. The way it declares their readiness, Britain says you can use British arms, British missiles to attack the territory of Russia. Both sides are probing their positions, because the logic is what Xi Jinping is talking to with Macron. He had listened to Blinken, he is now visiting Macron, because France is the only country that has nuclear arms in EU. Hello to those who got rid of them in Ukraine. Then he'll visit Hungary and Serbia, Russian friends in EU. And then after that, Putin is visiting Xi Jinping as newly inaugurated figure. So if you trace that logic, Putin comes third. At first, there was a meeting with Americans, then with Europeans. It means the Chinese want to gather a bigger picture, all of the opinions, all of the possibilities for development, and only after that talk to Putin. If Putin was indeed strong, if China, in relation to Putin, would have been in the position that Russian propaganda paints them in, that they are brothers and supporters and allies, then he would have met Putin first, and then would have met Blinken and Macron. And here everything is in reverse. So it's already understandable, Chinese general positioning of forces in this conflict. And all of that should be considered as diplomatic support to those visits that are happening now, those behind-the-scenes, scary, mysterious negotiations. So one should not be too nervous about that. Pay attention to what's happening, but that should not be really worrisome. It doesn't imply any new forces on the front, any new high escalation. This is literally setting the new framework. This is on the left, this is on the right. These are the limits that we can discuss it in. For us, it's favorable that the West now considers direct intervention in this war, and they're not terribly afraid of nuclear blackmail. So these are two great news for us. Because earlier, the West did not have defined position before Macron's statement, while Russia was saying that they might use nukes and they're definitely ready to push the front and push Ukraine to certain limits and might even consider attacking countries of EU and NATO. So the West gathered together, made their mind, and gave an answer. If after these visits we'll hear something from China about Russia or the world having to be more careful with nukes, that means that, once again, China is on the side that no nukes should be involved in this conflict. That means all these Russian huffing and military exercises with tactical nukes is just posturing. So, yeah, indeed, that's what they're setting. They're setting a new flow, a new framework, within which the negotiations will go, where they will play diplomatic poker or fool, whatever game you like. That's an explanation for those who want to understand deeper the framework of international politics, and those who are interested whether French or American troops will come the day after tomorrow, or if they wake up tomorrow to see Russian tactical nuke exploding. That's why I want to say neither of those is coming soon, or at all. So no need to worry here. Let's also look in the Macron statement related to possible bringing of French troops to the front. He said the framework that if the front collapses and or if there'll be a specific request. Do I understand it correct that there are some bilateral guarantees between Ukraine and France that account for this possibility? And I do have a question, whether do you think we should send this request in advance, invite their troops basically to Ukraine? Well, Nikolai, this request will not be published in the open, I think. If that happens, at first they will appear in Ukraine, and then documentation will be published about that. Because nobody will shout from the pulpit, hey, we're coming, this is our route, these are our vehicles, this is how we transport. And moreover, if French will decide that it's necessary for them to participate, it will happen. I think we are probably ready, unless we already have, actually we probably have already agreed about some things. And Macron recently gave a big programmatic interview where he talked about the destinies of Europe, where he outlined the vector and explains why did he make a decision about intervention of French troops. His line is rather simple. He's concerned about the destinies of Europe. Basically, everything we talked about in autumn when I was criticizing the damned West, right, in some of the streams, he was giving similar grades as I was back in the day, but one thing is me, another is Macron, who is the leader of the nuclear country in Europe. Britain stands outside of it for a bit, even though they actually did sign a mutual accord with France about resisting nuclear threats from third parties, understandably which ones, right? And he gave the same grade to the West, that the discussion is about the destiny of Europe. The Europe needs to awaken, to tighten its belt and rise. Nobody will be defending it except Europe, and even America. Even if America joins to help, Europe needs to be strong enough to defend itself. And basically he is outlining that they've been sleeping too long, they've been pushing their responsibility and security onto somebody else's shoulder, and it's time for Europe to wake up, to answer the challenges, both internal and external, and France is ready to be a locomotive for this motion. It's a very programmatic interview, and it actually deserves a separate stream, separate analysis, but since we're bringing it up like this, so. And only after all that, he talks about possibilities and the possible outcomes. And by the way, he did use the word combination, the death of Europe. Before that, the Europeans were basically swatting at the death of Europe statements, and they were calling that it's alarmism, and it's not so. Now we hear that word group, that word combination from one of the leaders in Europe. And he's talking about preventing the death of Europe and actions and steps they need to make in order to prevent it. And his logic is simple. He needs to make steps on the borders of Europe without letting the trouble to come closer. And that's the logic he is outlining. And when he says now that we're not fighting with the people of Russia, and we do not want to replace power in Russia, after meeting with Xi Jinping, he also shows his framework, his limits, and he outlines that for Europeans and the French people that our goal is not to destroy Russia or remove Putin, but our goal is stop Russian expansion into Europe proper. And for that, France is ready. He is ready to use troops with nuclear weapons behind them. That's his position. In Soviet times, those who remember, there was a slogan on every military barrack. I remember it since my childhood. We don't need anybody else's stuff, but we'll not give ours. And that's his slogan. They're not going to create any revolution in Russia, but we will not let Russia to exert pressure on EU. Very straightforward and precise, easy to remember. Alexey Macron also has another initiative related to Olympic ceasefire that he wants to offer to Xi Jinping. This looks rather unique on the backdrop of other things happening, on the backdrop of Russia preparing certain actions to sabotage different European countries. Do you think the statement looks naive, or should it be a political statement? No, Nikolai, this is an important element of this strategic ambiguity framework. He shows, look, we have open hands, we don't want to fight. Brothers, we don't want to fight with you, but if you will threat, if you will make a move for your gun, we'll shoot you. And he's showing we are full of good intentions, despite the existing threat. We are not going to give in to your threats, but also we're suggesting options to de-escalate. If you're not going to de-escalate, then we may consider other things, including military interventions. He's a democratic leader, democratically elected. So if he will be following just the logic of increasing the conflict, he will be asked a lot of questions, both in his own country and in EU. Why are you doing that? Why are you heating things up? That's why for every statement about additional action, he makes another statement about options to de-escalate. And here he says, look, nobody is attacking anybody, nobody wants to remove anybody, we are suggesting steps to de-escalate. And then he says, well, but we are not heard. Russia continues to exert pressure, and that's why we are ready. And then tomorrow they sent French ambassador to Putin's inauguration, right? And he indicates, okay, this is a good step of goodwill, for example. We do not provoke you, but we are telling you that if you will go here, you will find a big wall, and that wall will be shooting at you. And you will actually find it before you get to EU proper in Ukraine. So everything is very logical from that point of view. He needs to give a very precise signal. We are not escalating, but if we will be threatened, and if you will escalate things against us, we are ready to meet you. And these are the signals he is sending. So it looks that his logic about such a signal to Xi Jinping is an attempt to remove a mask from Chinese leader as well, whether to probe whether he's ready to support peace initiative, and if not, what would that mean? Right, including that as well. He is giving a ball to Chinese and asking them, okay, how about your position should deviate now from being a position of statements, but become a position of actions? How about a truce during the Olympic Games? That has been a tradition for thousands of years, and it's, remember, sort of the Christmas truce in some wars. And Chinese need to make their mind now whether they do support that initiative or not, because if they do, they definitely are for de-escalation. If they are not supportive of that initiative, then they would be expressing their position publicly. So he is putting them at the fork to remove the mask and to set their actual position in this conflict. At that time, Cameron, Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? Minister of Foreign Affairs in Britain, he suggested a 100-year partnership that caused some euphoria in Ukraine, in certain people. But Britain will have more elections, and position of the ruling party now will probably change at some point, and they don't look too strong right now. Do you think Britain can play back such initiatives if they happen? Nikolai, if the treaty will be signed, if we will get this agreement signed, it will be very difficult to revoke it. 100-year contracts are not actions of one cabinet. These are usually very well calculated initiatives, and they are not offered without agreement with Parliament, where representatives of different parties reside. Simple reason that if that was not supported internally and in the Parliament, that would be a big scandal, right? Because 100 years, nobody of us will be here. What are we leaving to our ancestors? Relations with a country who will always be in a dangerous position, being on the border with Russia. So without pre-work, without proper support, there would be a big scandal. Press would be attacking it. Since none of this is happening, I think the step was pre-agreed upon, and that's a serious story then. And I don't remember in recent history these agreements. There is an agreement between Britain and Portugal since the end of the 14th century. That's the oldest one. But I don't think there are other relations of that magnitude, that length in Britain. This is a very serious statement. Such a practice of 100-year long agreements, is it something traditional for Britain, Alexey, or is it something special for Ukraine? Well, for Ukraine, it's definitely special. It's a new thing. For Britain, one probably would need to dive deeper into their political history to see if anybody else ever got a suggestion, an offer of a 100-year-long deal. It sounded like thunder among the clear sky. I've been looking at and researching and analyzing political situations since '99, and I have never heard about 100-year-long agreements. So this is very extraordinary. And there was also reaction about Cameron's position from Russians, again in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. They think that with this statement that he made, that Ukraine can also use British arms against Russian territory, that you mentioned this as a sign by which Cameron disavowed the statements made by Britain earlier that British missiles of long-range characteristics will not be used against Russia, that Cameron basically cancelled these statements and acknowledged his country to be one of the sides in this conflict. Does it matter for Britain, or they will just close their ears and keep walking? Yeah, I think they won't even move an eyebrow to that, because they usually make decisions very well calculated. They have rich experience in this regard, and I'm quite sure they calculated possible Russian reactions. And just on the outward, if you look at different statements they make, they've been making a lot of mutually exclusive statements. They do, they don't, you can, you can't, and they usually were checking formal and informal reactions to that. And that allowed them to create the whole structure, the framework of their motion. They asked their intelligence services, and the intelligence probably told them, you should not be afraid, or maybe you should be afraid within that frame. And that's why they now know what they can do, how they can do it, and they're taking a very stern position. Their position is the sternest among EU and US, or compared with them. And those £3 billion, with a bit more, which they promised to us, I understand, annually over 100 years, this is a very serious support. This is almost pre-war military budget. Pre-war military forces budget of Ukraine. We had $5 billion. What Britain is offering is almost 4, and this is a very serious aid, even if it will not last for the whole 100 years and just several of them. This is still a very serious support, in both after-war restoration and preparation for the second round. And I once again remind us that we need to be prepared for the second round so well that it would never occur, so that Russia would never be tempted. And I suggest we should go, Alexey, to the front. Let's take a look at the map. Before we go, Nikolai, look, Department of State in the United States, before the Putin's inauguration, released a statement that they acknowledge Putin as a president of Russia. That's on the eve of his inauguration. And Ukraine, meantime, said that they do not recognize Putin as president and appealed to the world to do the same. Signals are sent. Russia sent to the international police data on half of our political leadership, requesting them to be arrested. Poroshenko and many others. Why? Because they are canceling the first two Minsk agreements from Russian side that were signed under Poroshenko. And the signal is that we are not going to sign any agreements with this power in Ukraine. This is a very strong signal. And at the same time, our side is also sending a signal that we're not talking to Russian leadership. So direct negotiations, as long as Zelensky is in the president's seat of Ukraine and Putin is in the president's seat of Russia, direct negotiations between countries are not possible. Americans have a longer calculation. They acknowledged Putin's presence. It doesn't imply that they switched to his side, but it tells us that they have relations with China, where Putin is a third party, and they still want to have levers and show Putin what will happen to him if he will be too stubborn. All right, let's maybe finish that topic of relations between the United States and Russia. Uranium. The United States is now prohibiting imports from Russia of that mineral. And as much as I'm researching the war and other stories, and I've heard a lot of statements from different analysts that Russia and US will never denounce their relations, will never break apart because of the uranium. And now we see that they actually are ready to cut this cord. They are giving some time for companies to finish calculations and payments, but they are drifting away. What do you know? Well, I'm not exclusive expert in uranium, but what do I know is that there are only three producers of that kind of fuel: US, Russia, and France. French lived off Sahel, those 5 countries in Africa that were in pro-French Union, from where 4 of them asked France to leave, to skedaddle after the recent changes of regimes there. What is interesting for me, though, that none of those leaders from those 4 countries is present at Putin's inauguration. I think it's only Guinea-Bissau that will be visiting, but I don't know if they're a member of those relations, of those countries who had relations with France. So it just shows that everything is not so smooth there. Kazakhstan was also a significant supplier, Ukraine as well, and Russian Federation was part of that trifecta. But not many people knew that Kazakhstan is now under belt of Russia after those Bishkek events. They exchanged a few things, but Kazakhstan still has some sovereignty. And Americans had indeed serious relations with Russian Federation and uranium, military and airplane-grade titanium, which seemed that these relations will not be ever torn, but now they are. They are drifting apart on uranium supplies. And by the way, that prohibition also implies one more thing, that Rosatom, Russian nuclear agency, is very active in the world, but they have significant, over a dozen projects in the world that are being built anew. And they also have several dozen nuclear stations that they service. So this is a serious expansion, because building a nuclear plant implies that the country will be tied to Russia for dozens of years for servicing and fuel. These are your 100-year-old contracts alike, right? And just to remind, the Chernobyl power station is scheduled to decommission in over 60 years. This is how long it takes to gradually decommission and stop these plants. So this is a long-term, very serious geopolitical levers and Russian influence in the world via that. But that can be, and I think we should discuss it with better specialists in nuclear industry, but it could be another hit on Russian uranium and nuclear industry at large. That many people talk that this industry will be untouchable. No, it is apparently now. Once again, I would remind that when I was still working at the Bank of Wall Street, the sanctions against Rosatom that we suggested to implement immediately, Americans refused to do that 2 or 3 times. They said anything except for that. But having it surfaced again 2.5 years later, it implies that they have done the preparatory work and now they're ready to implement these much more serious sanctions on at least the portion of what Rosatom is manufacturing or contracts it's engaged in. But this is a very serious step. The first 2 times we did not succeed. They were just removing Rosatom from the final document, even though we really pushed for it. And we indicated that this is Russia's instrument of expansion. So apparently America now figured a way to go around it. They found uranium somewhere. I don't know if they will tell us. Perhaps we should poll specialists. Let's clarify here. Do you think it could be Ukrainian uranium, Alexey? I don't know, Nikolai, but I suspect our nuclear industry is in a very poor state. Last time I heard, there were bankruptcies, there were some hostile takeovers of companies, so not sure. I have not heard a lot about this market, but if Ukraine had any relations with America, we're a big village, it's difficult to keep things under wraps, we probably would have known. So they found it somewhere, or created enough stockpile to last them for a while, and after that they'll reconsider. All right, about negotiations that you mentioned, that both countries closed an option, Ukraine and Russia, to negotiate directly. But there were several statements. One was made by Dmitry Kuleba, that negotiations between Russia and Ukraine can start after Switzerland, could be direct negotiations. And this is a signal, right? It was put there, and it also goes against Zelensky's order that we're not negotiating with Putin's government. But this probability was sounded by Minister of Foreign Affairs. Right, we have several statements. We also have Kibitsky, the speaker of the Intel services, and he gave a very good estimation that, yes, we are ready to negotiate when time comes. And that estimation coincides with the opinion of one scoundrel that keeps coming to your stream. So we talked about that for a while, but what I think it is a framework pre-Switzerland. There are different countries that are going to participate, and I think these statements are made to convince those who are thinking whether to come or not to come and ask for certain preconditions. This is the signal for them. This is how it is done. Look, the whole world politics is done on separate meetings, informal, hunting, going on a yacht together, eating at some fancy reception together, getting a special hotel or some of the stage meeting. These public forums only get the documents that are being pre-discussed already for about 90 to 100%, and leaders meet only much later when everything is already agreed upon. And there is such a thing that there's a difference between formal and non-formal meetings, when countries have agreed about certain things and send signals out in the open, preparing everything for these future meetings. Look, we have talked, on our level we have negotiated everything. This is a support and approval for you to continue going into the official stage. That's why the series of loud statements that were made by both sides, and for me these are the signals made after informal meetings to send the ball to some partners. That's what it's seen like, for example, to India, to China, to Arab countries, and that's how it should be estimated on this stage. So what Skibitsky said, the negotiations, the real ones with actual content, cannot start earlier than the first half of 2025. Yet he said that both sides are building most favorable positions for them. And I think he might be implying that future counteroffensive that Jake Sullivan said. The counteroffensive? Oh, ours. Yeah, I mean ours. So do you think such a long frame into the second half of 2025 after a counteroffensive potentially announced by Sullivan or mentioned by him, while the situation on the front is rather difficult? Why these statements? Do they birth strange expectations within society? Well, for me, it's a bit mysterious why is it needed to be spoken about at this stage. But one can derive the logic here that, look, we will be pushing back on their counteroffensive, and then we will take strategic initiative, which goes from one side to another after one of them exhausts enough resources, and then we will push back. On the other hand, the position of Sullivan is interesting. That $61 billion package that US gave, and there is nothing else in sight, that doesn't quite sum up to the counteroffensive. So there's got to be additional aid very similar to what is already being given in size in order for us to even consider counteroffensive. We also need to mobilize more people, gather our army, try not to lose resources and people, fending off the Russian push, make sure that Russia exerts itself and exhausts its resources. I would say we need twice the size of help that we're getting to do that. Perhaps we'll have, that's what's coming from Europe, maybe it'll amount to that, don't know. Or perhaps we can take another option if they take on the border with Belarus, and then we can take some of the forces we keep on the north and send them to the front. Maybe. That is also possible. Yet American government also talked about additional $50 billion of aid that could be given to Ukraine, but this is still in the land of probabilities. We just don't know. But do you think Sullivan's statement tells you also that you should not be expecting aid in the next year because 61 billion is for 2 years? No, I don't think that would imply this, because definitely for this 61 billion we would be good to just hold our own. That's not enough to do counteroffensive actions. I think he implies more that at least it'll take us another 6 months to repel the current counteroffensive from Russia, and after that we'll see. I don't know. It's very ambiguous at the moment. All right. Another strange news coming from US, that Biden may withdraw his candidacy in favor of Michelle Obama. That's Der Spiegel published in EU. Do you think it's anything real, or is it winking at Trump? These conversations are about 100 years old already. I've been, over a year, I've been ago in America, and that's when I already heard some of these rumors as possible scenarios that if Biden will be running out of steam, maybe Michelle Obama will pick the banner. But this is from a fairy tale land. This actually has the same status, or actually even lower status than appearing of the French troops on the front. Yeah, this option is probably considered, but is it on the table? Is it real? I don't know. I don't think so. Looking at what I know, I would be not concerned about this eventuality. The difference between Trump and Biden, official difference now, is only within 2%. Michelle Obama, nobody even measured her ratings. That would have been a very risky move. First of all, nobody knows whether she can gather or enough support as Biden and outplay and overplay Trump. And you have you have only maybe half a year to make that decision. And if you do it, it'll be 3 months left after that. It just maybe not be enough to get enough voters. Perhaps it could be used as a shock scenario, but and it is discussed, but as a very remote scenario, and there are no serious plans behind it. At least I haven't heard serious planning behind it. This is more of a let's examine the options. Perhaps this or maybe that. So that's the status. And I could have brought this discussion back in September in our streams, but I didn't think it to be material. Der Spiegel did it for us now, half a year later. All right. Let's look at the map, perhaps do more systemic, either from the north, from Kupiansk, or from Kherson in the south. Let's start from Kupiansk. All right, what's happening there? They are aggregating their forces on Kharkiv direction. According to the data in the open media, that group may be reaching 50,000. Is it a lot or is it a little? On one hand, it is both. It's a lot to create enough provocations on the border and do the raids and some military activity and force us to keep at least the same group, about 50,000 as well, maybe even more. So this is not Good. The good news is that this group is not enough to not only take Kharkov, but not even to move towards it in a serious fashion. But given that Kharkov is not far from the border, that's one of their ways to create these provocations near Kharkov, to pretend that they are attacking us there, because they do want to distract us on the sides. They need to make sure they hold our troops in different locations away from the direction of their main attack, such as Kharkov. That would be a secondary. And one need to also understand that whatever attacks Kharkov now is the same group that is in Lugansk and Kupiansk. That's the same group that is maneuvering on this front. So these 50,000 is their right flank, the right flank of this Kupiansk group, that they can maneuver at any time if we or they are successful on that segment of front. And that is the same group, goes all the way down to the border of Lugansk and Kharkov districts. So for them, it's an opportunity. If they will have any success near Kharkov, they can expect us to bring more troops there. If not so successful, they can keep maybe 20,000 and keep shelling Kharkov and doing other shenanigans along the border and maneuver and bring the other 30 to a more opportune place. Now again, if we will, with hands of Russian Volunteer Corps and Legion of Free Russia, go on a raid to Belgorod region, they again have those 50,000 to try to counter that. So this is a significant amount of troops to create some activity here, and they will be playing on the border of that full Sea-Valuki line. This is where they separate different forces, and I think it is a rather smart move on their behalf. But again, they're not talking about taking Kharkov. They don't have enough forces to do that, but they have enough forces to give us trouble on this side. Now let's go at Kupiansk itself. Let me clarify here, Alexey, that aggregation of 30 to 50,000 troops, Skibitsky is also writing that, and The Economist, that it can go up to 70,000. Are they aggregated somewhere here, outside of the front line, where we don't see them? Or is it the same people who are on the front? Oh, no, yeah, they're up north. They're in Belgorodskaya region of Russia. So we see them. We can see their movements. In a modern world, it's difficult to conceal when you aggregate groups of that size. But on the other hand, it's like chess. In chess, you see the enemy's side of a board, right? And yet somebody wins, somebody loses. So the fact that you know where the troops are, it takes away their operative ambiguity, so they cannot jump out of nowhere, but they can still conduct rather effective actions and create a lot of issues for us, a lot of problems for us, from Kharkov to Donetsk on that segment of the front, because they can be maneuvering these forces. The only thing that can be excluded is taking of Kharkov. You definitely cannot take the city of that size with that group. Kharkov has enough trouble already. They keep getting hit by Russian missiles, and in addition to an attempt to create some motion towards it on the ground, there'll be also information campaign. So Ukraine and people who live in Kharkov will be seeing a lot of information action, information warfare too. And by the way, they can move these 70,000 or 50,000 from that part of the front to Donetsk front as well if they need to. Here, yeah, they do push towards Kupiansk. This is a key element of our defense. This is a connection, a connector of different roads and defense and logistics. They also are pushing towards Borovaya. They took Kistovka, sad as it is. And on the south, they pushing more in the general direction of Liman. That protrusion that you see, that's the same idea. The actions they've been conducting at the beginning of this war, it's the same logic: capture of Lugansk and getting to Kharkov, and perhaps creating a threat to Kharkov from Borovaya from the south, and Kharba from Kupiansk. The only thing that is like a thorn in their thigh is our protrusion here. We're still holding that position near Siversk, near Seversky Donetsk. Not too many people know where that town is, but this is where we're holding it, right? So that group doesn't allow them to join their flanks, because once joined, they will be presenting a rather serious threat for Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, further to the left, and that's why they're trying to cut off this protrusion from the north, from the south, but they're failing. We have very good troops there, 54th Brigade, that keeps kicking their butt and doesn't allow them to move for quite a while already. However, this is a serious problem that they will be trying to solve after they resolve the actions and goals that they are trying to achieve at the bottom. And here down to the bottom, they're trying to get to Chasov Yar. You can see those arrows. And here they have another difficult situation around Klishchiivka and Andreevka. See that green protrusion where they continue pushing, trying to get their southern flank while they're moving towards Chasov Yar. And this is like a small Seversky protrusion on our side that is also very uncomfortable for them, because it is scary to go to Chasov Yar while you have our troops so far deep in the south. They're trying to push back there to kick us out of those positions, but we have some good brigades, like 28th Brigade, rather glorious and successful one. And it's not a big secret. People know about that. They know about it. It's not a big deal that we're disclosing it. We, by the way, keep helping them with our fundraisers. So their main task now is to take Chasov Yar to the northeast of Konstantinovka. You can see these arrows on the right top of this map. And then start threatening that green triangle from the north. As for the tasks to the south, Syrsky said recently that he was on the front for a couple days, and according to his estimates, the enemy is pushing towards Pokrovsk and Kurakhov. Here is Pokrovsk. See that right on the left top of the map now, where two roads collide, that junction. For me, it's madness. They would need a lot more troops to get there. Of course, it is very tempting for them. If they had a lot of troops, they should have been pushing there, of course, given that our defense in that area is rather weak. And they need to try to run, in an ideal world, they would want to run so far. It will be a serious hit of logistics to Konstantinovka and the like, to our morale and the like. This is the important task for them, because they do want to attack our morale. But from the military point of view, this is still an adventurous move. What is not an adventurous move would be a motion to the north instead, not to the left from here. And slowly encircle Taretsk. See that area that is now possibly, this one, next candidate for encirclement. And that would allow them then to consider Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka in the future. That would create them enough platform to continue moving to the left, if they succeed in this. And they indeed need to prepare a certain platform to make sure that they have enough logistics, if they will be successful here, to fight for Lugansk and Kramatorsk. But in order to get to Pokrovsk, they need to get to Kurakhova. See these other small towns, Shevchenko, Vishneve, Ukrainsk, Kurakhivka. So that's where they're pushing more, because they need that purge in order to continue motion in the north. Generally, they are succeeding. They are making that slow motion, because we have an unfortunate gap in our defense. Not a failure utterly, but definitely a weaker spot. And this is not exactly a good thing. See, there is a protrusion near Vuglidar, where the enemy is failing to move further. Yeah, right here at the corner, where they cannot move. And it's very tempting for them to go and push more on Kurakhova, but then at the same time they need to hold the front at the bottom. And they're very failing at the bottom, so it's difficult for them to withdraw troops from here. They are somewhat successful on the Eastern Front, but our success in the south, our successful holding in a few parts of the front, actually is holding the operative tactical ideation. and those three operative balconies that they're trying to create in Donetsk region, that's what is stopped by some of the groups that we have on the front that are holding their positions so well. You can see with that zoom, you can see several pockets. Siversky, then Klishevka, Andreevka, and then Vugledar is the third one. So these are the points where they dream to crush our defense, but they're failing to do that continuously. And Vugledar, it's 82nd, and on our side, they're very strong guys, very experienced, and they're holding their ground very well. The enemy is really trying to push them away, but we're not. So what's stopping them is our ability to hold these three balconies, and that is limiting their motion. That continues to happen, though, in a slower fashion after they've taken Avdiivka. Why Commander-in-Chief said that Kurachovskaya and Pokrovskaya direction, he perhaps gave up his own concerns, because it's much more logical for them to turn north to try to cut off Toretsk, because without additional 50 to 70,000 in that direction, they do not have a good chance to get to Pokrovsk. However, maybe he got some additional information that they do have amassed some resources for this. We'll see. Still, in the military logic, that's not exactly a good practice to push so far out. So let me clarify here, Alexey. The goal is to smooth the front, right? To kind of straighten it up here. That's their main push. So they would want to cut this balcony, cut this protrusion as well, and cut the Vugledar corner. Right. This would be the condition to the future offensive towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. And of course, they need to cut the Vugledar protrusion if they want to go to Kurakhova or anywhere in the south, and then continue to the borders of Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye regions. I wanted to ask you one more thing, Alexey. The logic of Kharkov, the attacks on Kharkov, am I correct thinking that it is just to distract us, so we would throw some effort to Kharkov direction to defend that area from their scary offensive? Right, that's their ideation. They want to hold a lot of our troops there, so we cannot use them in the south and stop their motion there. And by the way, it's the same command that is attacking Kupiansk and to the south of it, and the same that's attacking Kharkov. So they have that additional lever of 50 to 70 or 30,000 troops that they can move around. This is uncomfortable because they would be shifting their attack points, and they're basically probing for weak points in the front, and whenever they discover one, they drop more troops and keep pushing. That's what happened near Avdiivka and the Cheretina. And our command will have to be guessing where they're doing it and be more quick in maneuvering our resources. Yet, as we talked before, despite us having to move our troops on the internal side of that horseshoe shape, somehow we are slower than Russians. And thing is, as we talked about that, on a certain level of military organizations, they have a lot more transport. They have trucks, they have other means to move their brigade. Our brigade needs to request that move. They cannot move by themselves. And given that they're also part of the bigger aggregations like armies and divisions, they have additional resources on that level that commander of the army, commander of the division can use without having to ask anybody. And we're losing in this regard because we do not have these resources. Until we have enough logistics within each brigade, enough trucks with each brigade, and until then, we will not be able to match. And because for now, they're like gypsy caravan with a lot of private vehicles, used to be private, smaller trucks, pickup trucks. We, very hodgepodge type of transportation is used for these brigades. So until we are serious about it, and until we find ways to join these brigades into divisions, armies, and corps that will be used conjointly, and not like we do now, when one brigade that is fighting in a very difficult position, a battalion of it would be taken away and thrown another 100 kilometers to a different place. Brigade cannot even neither move or challenge that in any capacity. So Unfortunately, our leadership, military leadership, is still failing to understand that. Look, Israel is fighting in the Gaza sector. That's an example. What are they fighting there with? They're fighting with divisions. Now, I'm not talking that Hamas is a serious foe like Russia is. Nobody is creating joint units and sending a segment of one brigade one direction, the other part of that brigade in the other direction. We fought like this back in 2014 when we were not a real army. Now we have finally overcome that. We started fighting on the brigade level. But the next step is very logical and very clear. I will never cease to criticize and use cuss words and break dishes and creating scandals in the media sphere until our glorious leadership in the military will finally understand that they need to return corps and armies and fight within the elements. Do not split the brigades apart. Only that can give you additional boost in your battle worthiness. That's what Russians are doing. And they're faster on the longer side of that horseshoe, as I said, than we are on the inner side. There was a very interesting article from Schwetz, and he was referencing the open media. I usually wait for the open media data to show up, not to harm. He said that Russian command is exerting a lot of effort to create a single system, a single distributed system for intelligence and military actions on the level of corps, up at 12 kilometers. That's a brigade commander, up to 100 is a corps, and then an army, etc. So they zoom in, zoom out, depending upon your level of responsibility. And on the top, on the highest level, they include satellite communications and intel and everything. And what he is saying is that they don't have enough Starlinks, they don't have enough communication to enable this feature, and they don't have enough command points. But what he is outlining that as a problem that they're trying to create these segments within the front that limits the time from having discovered the threat to being able to attack it. That is attempt is try to make them more effective. And they didn't have enough organization before because earlier some of the Orlans and other UAVs that were above our territory, they would have gathered the intel, but they didn't have enough organizational effort to be able to strike back faster. Now they started using that on parts of the front and they are getting results. First time they hit HIMARS, first time they hit Patriot. And this is the result of them not getting new equipment, but it is, first of all, the organizational effort result. They already are exceeding us in their organizational capability. And they're fighting on a higher level, on the level of armies and divisions that we don't. And now they're aggregating more experience in managing their front on that level. And I don't see reaction on our side. We're begging for American aid. Okay, what else? Where is organizational effort in our armed forces? When these idiots in the general command, in the office of the president, I'm not picking words now, when it'll finally dawn upon them that you can add additional 15 to 20% effectiveness on the front and keep growing it by forming divisions, armies, and corps, and prohibit splitting the detachments apart, that they have to be moved as a whole. How can you manage a hospital if you take one group of doctors to Kherson, other to Kharkov, and the fourth to Lvov? As the head of the hospital, how do you manage that? How do you do logistics? How do you exchange experience? How do you get new supplies and new doctors? Imagine you have a company based in Kiev, but for some reason you keep accounting in Kherson, logistic in Lvov, marketing in Kharkov, and somebody else to Ivano-Frankovsk. And that's how you manage your company, right? One would understand that's a simple example to show that your communication lines will make things worse. It's hard to work like that. Simplest example, Israel is fighting against Hamas, a much weaker enemy with divisions, but we're fighting with a huge enemy like Russia with brigades. How much longer would it take them to understand? And another serious hole, more and more often we hear complaints of military that they refuse to take those fortifications that are being made by the civilian services away from front. And I want to say that we do have military engineers. Soviet army had fantastic military engineers, one of the best military fortification schools in the world. And even military generals do not quite dig that area, but those engineers that we have left still understand that. They are not on par with ex-USSR level of construction, but they're not being given enough resources to do that or to lead the effort. Instead of that, they would send a lot of private companies. They would dig trenches with that excavator. At best, they would put a whole concrete made structures that are not designed to withstand enemy's shelling. And this is not done by the military standards. And that's where our military, there were actually a video published today, that they are not going to go to these mass graves. They are not designed to withstand enemy's attack. That's why the soldiers actually starting to dig their own entrenchments. By the way, that's one of the reasons why Cherechina front is collapsing a bit, because we don't have enough fortification lines there. And that's, again, another serious issue for the government, because it's too tasty, too lucrative for those companies to earn some money on the military contracts. Nobody's really auditing it, and there are issues. Many of these positions that are being built are not being usable, and military have to dig their own. And that's on the backdrop of Russian push, right in front of the major Russian push. So we're saying that Russians are dumb, corrupt, and funny in the way they fight, but they still managed to do that. They still managed to build their Surovikin line, and we're so brave and smart, we're failing to do a simple thing, and our infantry will be paying with their lives for that. By the way, it's a day of infantry today, and a few days ago there was a day of the border guards. Border guards are some of the coolest guys in the military. They have their own special pride, and they can give 100 points to most of other detachments. And of course, happy Infantry Day to our infantry. They are the core of the army. The rest of the army is just helping. And infantry is the most difficult destiny, and yet the most honorable. So yeah, our infantry will pay for these mistakes with their blood. And it's a very serious issue with fortifications. Too much corruption, too much non-specialist involvement, too little involvement involving the real experts. And unfortunately, it'll be fresh mobilized who will be paying with their lives, who don't know how to fight yet, not too familiar, who haven't dug their own trenches. So that's another crime against our people. How much more? Why do we keep doing it? Associated Press actually is writing about the same thing, Alexey. Armed forces of Ukraine do not have real defense lines behind the front. They're just confirming the same information we've been discussing. We talked about that in a previous stream, and there were a number of signals related to it. That the lines that they were constructed, they were even abandoned, right? And at that point, my video frozen. Well, okay, the moment you start attacking the office of the president, I guess the signal disappears. Let's say the end of part 1 at this point. Please do not forget to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys later.